In the year 1854, a young girl named Adelaide Thompson was locked away in a Victorian asylum. By nature, she was not violent, nor was she possessed by spirits. Her crime was far stranger. She spoke in a language that no one could understand, a tongue that seemed to belong not of this world. To explain her, doctors, priests, and even her own parents tried. But the truth they uncovered was far more disturbing than any superstition. If forgotten histories and unsettling Victorian cases fascinate you, make sure to subscribe for more stories hidden in the shadows of the past. And in the comments, let me know, do you think Adelaide's words were madness, or something we still cannot explain? The only reliable account of the child's early years comes from the surviving records of the Bath Orphan Asylum, though they are incomplete and badly kept. Her name does not appear consistently. Sometimes she is listed as Mary H. Other times, it is Miss Shaw Hawthorne, a confusion that may be attributed to clerical neglect rather than to deliberate obfuscation. Certain it is that she entered the institution at the age of 3 in the winter of 1850, described as frail, dark-haired, and pale of complexion. No parentage was formally recorded. Typical for the period were the conditions of the asylum: overcrowded wards, insufficient food, and minimal personal attention. For most children, endurance of routine was expected rather than the reception of care. It is in this context that one detail, insignificant at the time, emerges. A nurse, identified in the ledger only as Nanny E, was known for occupying the children at night with elaborate stories. Her tales, several accounts later recalled by surviving staff suggest, often departed from scriptural themes. Instead, she spoke of distant realms, of unseen companions, of rewards that awaited those who befriended strangers from other worlds. Whether intended as entertainment or as warning, her words appear to have impressed themselves deeply upon certain children. The girl who would later draw such attention is first noted for her silence. She listens, though she does not always reply, one entry remarks. Another, more curious, is written in a margin: child speaks oddly in sleep. No explanation follows, and the handwriting differs from the main entry, suggesting an afterthought by an attendant. No language was specified, nor were details given about frequency. Still, the notation stands out precisely because the rest of the records are so sparse. By the time she was 3 years and 7 months, arrangements were made for her adoption. The couple who received her were respectable, middle-class parishioners, the father a tradesman of some means, the mother a housekeeper by nature. Considered fortunate was the adoption, as younger infants were preferred and few children of her age were chosen. Without hesitation, the couple signed the register. Their private correspondence, much later found among family papers, describes her as docile, quiet, and prone to long observation. No immediate sign of abnormality, no mention of odd speech, is found. The parents believed they had rescued her from poverty and neglect. Satisfied with her demeanor, they remarked only that she seemed serious beyond her years. Here the surviving documents end, before the onset of the behaviors that would later mark her case. Yet a faint trail of clues hangs like a shadow over her otherwise unremarkable adoption: the vague orphanage reports, the presence of a nanny whose stories dwelled on foreign worlds, and the unsettling margin note about her nocturnal speech. It is the kind of detail easily ignored by those closest to her, but glaring in hindsight to anyone piecing together the fragments. The parents, it seems, never returned to consult the orphanage records. They accepted their daughter as she was presented, ignoring what might have been warning or mere scribble. For them, she was only a child of 3, seemingly ordinary, taken into their home with the confidence that she would grow into the shape of their expectations. For us, reconstructing her story a century and a half later, that small note, "Child speaks oddly in sleep," reads less like clerical debris, and more like the first signal of a disturbance yet to come. By the age of 7, the girl's conduct had ceased to resemble that of her peers. Until this point, she had been quiet, but compliant, noted for her attentiveness rather than for her playfulness. Yet in the early months of 1853, her parents began to observe episodes of fixed staring, lasting between 10 and 15 minutes at first, then extending to nearly an hour. Marked neither by sleep nor by visible distraction were these episodes. Rather, she sat upright, her eyes trained upon a blank wall or unremarkable corner of the room, as though compelled by some private stimulus. The household records, chiefly her mother's diaries, suggest the events were initially dismissed as harmless reverie. "She is prone to sit and muse, eyes set to nothing, though I find no ill in it," one entry notes. Another, less sanguine, written by the father, remarks that the child loses herself in silence too long, and does not answer when spoken to. At this stage, the phenomenon was considered a temperament rather than a disorder. School records, however, add weight to the matter. Her teachers described her as vacant, but listening, an unusual phrasing repeated across more than one report. She would sit with her slate untouched, while other children completed their tasks. Yet, when questioned afterward, she could recite portions of the lesson with surprising accuracy. It was as though her attention were diverted inward, the faculty of listening preserved, while outward response had been suspended. Gradual, but measurable was the progression of these silences. What began as isolated moments became regular occurrences, appearing several times a week. At their longest, they were said to occupy the greater part of a morning, during which the girl remained immobile, eyes fixed upon an empty surface. Efforts to rouse her met with resistance. Shaking her shoulder gently, her parents reported, received only a dull yet irritated reply, as if disturbed from a private conversation. Occasionally, witnesses remarked that her lips moved imperceptibly, though no words were audible. "I thought she answered me, though no sound escaped," one teacher recorded. Another described her expression as engaged, as one nodding in agreement with a speaker unseen. Such observations, though cautiously phrased, introduced the disturbing implication that her silence was not passive, but interactive. Their dismissive stance was retained by her parents. The mother continued to characterize the episodes as daydreams, remarking that she is fanciful and prone to imagining. The father, less patient, urged her to correct the behavior, believing it a form of stubborn withdrawal. Yet neither parent appears to have recognized the consistency, or the increasing duration. Their attitude, common to the period, treated such conduct as a matter of discipline rather than of health. For the investigators, who would later reconstruct the case, these silences are not so easily set aside. The surviving descriptions point not to idle imagination, but to a sustained state of absorption, one in which the child behaved as if attending to stimuli beyond the range of others. Inevitably, the question arises, to what, or to whom, did she listen? No satisfactory answer exists within the documents. What remains is the recorded fact that a 7-year-old girl, in the ordinary environment of home and classroom, repeatedly surrendered herself to a silence that appeared neither accidental nor benign. Of an ordinary sort were the first drawings attributed to the child. Crooked houses, stick figures, the uneven scroll of numbers. These appeared in her school copybooks between arithmetic sums and penmanship drills, and at a glance revealed nothing beyond the idleness of a child's hand. Yet by the spring of 1853, the character of her markings began to alter in a manner noted by more than one observer. Teachers recorded that the usual doodles gave way to linear forms, repeated with a steadiness that belied accident. Instead of random scratches, her margins contained marks that resembled characters, strange letters without a known alphabet. Some bore sharp verticals, others curved into loops, and several reappeared across pages with no variation. Their recurrence was precise enough that one instructor remarked, "She must copy from somewhere, though no source is known." In time, these symbols combined into configurations that suggested faces. Circles, lines, and angular shapes merged into expressions. Vacant eyes, elongated mouths, distorted visages that seemed less drawn than assembled from a script of unfamiliar words. The gradual transformation is shown clearly in one exercise book preserved in the school's archive. On the first page, symbols stand alone. By the fifth, the marks are arranged in rows. By the 10th, the rows bend and intersect until the outline of a face, crude but undeniable, emerges. When shown the drawings, her parents dismissed them as fanciful inventions. All children imagine, the mother is quoted, and she prefers letters to dolls. The father expressed irritation rather than fear, ordering her to use her time on proper study. For them, the drawings represented childish distraction, of no greater concern than idle daydreaming. Less assured were the teachers. Their reports emphasized the persistence of the symbols across weeks. One noted that the shapes return exactly as though mimeized. Another observed that when pressed to explain, the child replied only by tracing the marks again, sometimes with her finger on the desk, silent but insistent. Attempts to redirect her failed. The symbols reappeared, not only in school books, but in scraps of paper taken from her room. Comparison was made to known alphabets, Greek, Hebrew, shorthand, but none matched. A visiting clergyman, shown the pages, remarked that the arrangement suggests order, not randomness, but he could not decipher their meaning. A local physician, consulted briefly, dismissed the matter as excessive invention, though he conceded the consistency was unusual. Gradually, the atmosphere surrounding the drawings shifted from amusement to unease. A reluctance to mark over the symbols was described by teachers, as though interfering with a pattern not meant to be broken. Some children in her class refused to sit beside her, claiming she writes faces that stare. Though no official action was taken, the notebooks stand as material evidence of a process both deliberate and unknown. From the vantage of later inquiry, the most striking feature is not the appearance of the symbols themselves, but their persistence. They were not isolated curiosities, but a developing system, repeated with accuracy over time, embedded in the margins of daily work. Each page, when examined, carries the impression of a child less at play than engaged in transcription, her hand compelled by a pattern that she neither explained nor abandoned. Within the family home, in the early summer of 1853 occurred the first recorded instance of the child's spoken departure from ordinary language. The event is preserved in the mother's private diary, later corroborated in fragments, by the father's correspondence. The entry, dated June 14, describes the girl approaching her mother in the kitchen during the evening hours, speaking in what is noted as a soft, but most peculiar tongue. The mother's account states that the child's words bore the weight of grammar, their cadence deliberate and arranged, though she could not identify a single term. She wrote, "It was as if she meant every syllable, but I could not answer, for it was no language of mine." The tone was not frantic, nor shouted, but calm, spoken with the expectation of comprehension. When the mother reacted with alarm, asking her to repeat herself in English, the girl appeared briefly startled. Then, without hesitation, she shifted into clear English, inquiring whether something was wrong. Her demeanor suggested no recognition of the peculiarity, as though she had never departed from the common tongue. Unsettled, the mother dismissed her quickly, but the incident left an impression too sharp to ignore. That evening, she relayed the occurrence to her husband. According to his letters, he attributed the episode to mimicry. "Children parrot nonsense," he wrote, "especially when they overhear foreigners in the street." He advised no further mention of it, urging his wife to discourage what he regarded as willful play. The matter might have ended there, had it not repeated in the father's presence 2 days later. While seated at the table, the girl addressed her mother in the same unfamiliar speech, the words slow, evenly paced, with intonation that suggested structured sense. The father interrupted, demanding she cease. The child stopped immediately, reverted to English, and asked, "What wrong, Papa?" in a tone of ordinary innocence. The father later described the words he heard as gibberish yet orderly. He maintained his position that it was childish invention, insisting, "She toys with us and it should not be indulged." The mother, however, recorded a different impression. In her view, the utterances carried the shape of meaning, though she could not determine their content. She noted her unease at the girl's calmness, the absence of hesitation, and the seamless transition back to English, as if the two languages were interchangeable. From that point forward, the household records show increasing division between the parents. The father continued to treat the episodes as defiance, a phase to be disciplined. The mother privately began to record not only the instances, but fragments of sounds as she remembered them. Drella men soon, written phonetically without translation. Her attempt to preserve them indicates that she suspected more than imitation. The significance of this first conversation lies not only in the strangeness of the speech, but in its delivery. Witnesses agreed it lacked the random babble of play. The voice was steady, the pauses consistent, the tone deliberate. To hear it was to recognize the structure of a language, even if its meaning was forever withheld. Within the classroom of the parish school on the morning of October 3, 1853, occurred the most serious disruption to date. A clear sequence of events is provided by surviving reports drawn from teacher testimony and the minutes of the local school board. At the commencement of lessons, the child refused to answer in English when called upon for recitation. Instead, she delivered a full response in the same unfamiliar tongue earlier noted by her parents. Witnesses describe her tone as even and deliberate, her gaze directed not at the instructor, but toward the far wall of the room. The words bore no resemblance to English, or to any foreign language recognized by the staff. Failing to comprehend, the other children began to laugh. Several mocked her by imitating sounds, to which she gave no reply. The teacher, Miss Cartwright, attempted to correct her by stern instruction, demanding that she repeat the answer in English. The child persisted in the strange speech, this time louder, her voice described as urgent, insistent, and accompanied by gestures of frustration. According to Miss Cartwright's own written statement, she approached the desk to seize the child's slate. At that moment, the girl rose abruptly and with both hands pushed her backward. The action was unexpected in its force. The teacher lost her footing, struck the corner of a desk, and fell to the floor. She sustained a laceration above the right brow and a severe contusion to the temple. Bleeding that required immediate attention was reported by witnesses. Sufficient was the injury to summon medical aid. Dr. Godfrey, called from nearby lodgings, dressed the wound and recommended bed rest. His report confirms the depth of the cut and attributes it to the sharp edge of the desk. Miss Cartwright, though recovering, was thereafter absent from instruction for several weeks. Within days, the school board convened to deliberate the matter. Their minutes described the child as violent, uncontrollable, and a danger to others. Some members advocated immediate expulsion. Others urged caution, citing her tender age and the unusual circumstances. Ultimately, she was suspended pending parental intervention. Parental accounts diverged. The father characterized the event as deliberate insolence, writing in his complaint that she struck her teacher out of wicked temper. The mother, however, noted in her diary that the girl expressed confusion afterward, insisting that she only spoke and they would not hear. The girl herself offered no apology in English. Instead, she lapsed into further use of her unknown tongue during the evening that followed. Soon, the broader community became aware of the incident. Neighbors spoke of the child who hurt her mistress, and speculation spread rapidly. Rumors of possession, madness, and unnatural influence circulated despite clerical discouragement. Her reputation, once merely peculiar, was now sealed. The significance of this event lies not only in the injury sustained, but in its timing. The first act of physical aggression was linked directly to her episodes of foreign speech. Where earlier witnesses recorded silence, staring, or strange utterance, here the behavior culminated in violence. The bluntness of blood upon the classroom floor transformed the matter from curiosity to threat, and from that point forward, the child was regarded less as an oddity than as a danger in need of control. Following the incident at school, the child's parents sought formal medical consultation. Initial examinations were conducted in Bath by local physicians, and dissatisfied with the lack of clarity, the family later presented her to practitioners in London. Surviving notes, though incomplete, illustrate the range of diagnostic speculation common to the mid-19th century, and the uncertainty that accompanied her case. The first physician of record, Dr. Mullally of Bath, observed the girl during one of her unresponsive episodes. He noted the fixed gaze, the rigidity of posture, and the absence of immediate response to direct questions. His written opinion classified the condition as a form of epileptic seizure of the silent order. Though he admitted that no convulsion or loss of balance was present, he recommended cold compresses, rest, and avoidance of excitable influences. When asked to repeat her strange speech before him, the girl complied. Dr. Mullally transcribed a short passage phonetically, Rana Sulan Vulari. He added, words bear pattern, but lack correspondence to known dialects. His conclusion dismissed the utterances as meaningless, though orderly. In London, a second opinion was sought from Dr. Anthony, a physician noted for his work on nervous disorders. His assessment diverged considerably. He attributed her condition to hysteria of the juvenile type, a diagnosis frequently applied to unexplained behaviors in children. In his notes, he emphasized her gender, remarking that nervous excitability is the common affliction of the female. Treatment was recommended in the form of isolation, regulated diet, and moral instruction. The language episodes, in his view, represented fancy elevated to delusion. A third practitioner, Dr. Pierce, offered yet another theory, incipient moral insanity. His report, more detailed, describes her as apparently rational in conduct, yet given to strange invention, violent outburst, and unaccountable speech. He regarded her drawings as evidence of an unbalanced imagination, her silence as withdrawal from moral restraint, and her unknown tongue as fabricated jargon. His prognosis was unfavorable, warning of progressive deterioration. One dissenting note appears in the papers of Dr. Hargreaves, consulted briefly in late 1853. Unlike his colleagues, he attended carefully to the structure of her speech. He observed that her sentences contained repetition, consistent pauses, and variations suggestive of grammar. "This is not babble," he wrote, "but constructed language with rules of its own." He admitted ignorance of its source, but cautioned against assuming randomness. His view was dismissed by others as overindulgent. No consensus emerged. The Bath physicians leaned toward epilepsy. The London men toward hysteria or insanity. Each diagnosis reflected more the prevailing categories of the time than the particulars of her case. Treatments varied from diet and rest to stricter discipline, but none addressed the central feature, the persistence of a language unknown yet undeniably structured. Confronted with contradictory advice, the parents followed none consistently. The father favored the harsher prescriptions, regarding his daughter as willfully disobedient. The mother, though unsettled, clung to Hargreaves's suggestion that her words bore meaning. The medical profession had offered labels, but no explanation, authority without understanding. Thus the consultations concluded. A catalogue of guesses, each confident yet inadequate, leaving the child no closer to remedy, and her family burdened with doubt. The physicians had defined her as sick, but none could say precisely with what. By late 1853, the child was referred not only to physicians, but to the emerging field of psychiatry, a discipline still unformed in method and terminology. Records from St. Luke's Hospital in London indicate that she underwent several sessions of observation by men who styled themselves as specialists in disorders of the mind. Their reports, clinical in form, but crude in interpretation, illustrate the limits of contemporary understanding. The consultation room is described in one set of notes as bare, with a table, 2 chairs, and a slate. The child was seated opposite the examiner, questioned repeatedly, and instructed to repeat her peculiar speech when prompted. She complied with little hesitation, speaking in phrases of varying length. Several were transcribed phonetically: Fenlo, Mare, Swan, followed by Dinkra, Volci, Tarin. These fragments, when reviewed, displayed repetition of certain syllables and a consistent rhythm of pause, as though governed by rules beyond chance. Despite this pattern, the examiners did not treat the utterances as language. Dr. Fenwick, the first to report, labeled them monomania of invention, by which he meant the fixation on a single delusional theme. In his words, the child is seized by a fancy of her own making and sustains it by gibberish that mimics the order of speech, without possessing its content. He recommended strict correction, warning that indulgence would reinforce her delusion. Another psychiatrist, Dr. Collier, described her condition as delusional invention, a phrase he applied to patients who fabricated elaborate lies or false identities. He emphasized her youth, remarking that such fabrication was the work of a fertile but unsound imagination. His conclusion stated, "The consistency of her jargon argues not for intelligence, but for persistence in folly." Not all observers agreed. A younger assistant, unnamed in the surviving documents, remarked that the speech resembles a system, noting that the girl used similar endings when pointing to objects, as though creating nouns or cases. His observation was not pursued further. Senior examiners dismissed it as unnecessary speculation, preferring to fit the case into existing categories. The atmosphere of these evaluations, reconstructed from testimony, was one of confinement rather than inquiry. The child was placed in a chair, instructed, corrected, and judged, but not understood. The rooms themselves, bare and narrow, accentuated the sense of scrutiny. For the examiners, she was not a subject of discovery, but of classification, to be fitted into the vocabulary of mania, insanity, or moral defect. Their failure lay not in observation, but in interpretation. They had preserved fragments of her speech, enough to show repetition and internal order, yet dismissed the possibility that a 7-year-old might be using a private language. The notion did not fit their taxonomy, and so it was excluded. To them, structure could exist without meaning, and invention was by definition delusion. In their final report, the examiners concluded, the child exhibits no possession, but clear signs of monomania characterized by fabricated jargon and occasional violence. She is not beyond management, but requires strict moral training and surveillance. The authority of their words masked the emptiness of their conclusions. The case was closed in their hands, but the phenomenon remained unaddressed.